So today, when we started a company in that wave, there was actually a collective lack of systematic understanding and value of the upstream supply chain.
Technological innovation happening too quickly is not a good thing for supply. Yes, it can cause generations of people to be left behind.
And if our investment can align with a continuous winner, then we actually have a chance to win.
Yes.
Rather than saying that the industry has progressed.
If you think about it seriously, you'll find that in terms of eating, the value that the supply side can create, the process of industrialization is the greatest. A brand is not just a story, consumption is not just a choice. Welcome to the brand consumption perspective of Magic Square. Hello everyone, welcome back. In the last two episodes, we had a program with Liang Ning where we talked about the current consumption and business environment, and many Chinese brands are facing some business difficulties. In that episode, we mostly discussed products and users from the perspective of the brand side. Today, I have invited an old friend whom I haven't seen in a long time, Chang, the founding partner of Chang Capital. Chang is an investment firm focused on investing in the new generation of consumer brands, retail and service formats. They have been closely tracking and researching, including industries in Japan and globally, comparing them with China's offline and online retail developments. They have accumulated many investment and research reports, some of which have been published externally and have also made significant investments in important brands. In the past 2 years, China's consumer environment has undergone many changes, and they have a profound understanding of the market. So today we will seriously look from the perspective of consumer goods investors to see how they choose loyal brands and businesses in the current business environment. Let's welcome Chang to say hello to everyone.
Hello everyone, I am Chang, the founder of Chang Capital and a veteran who has worked in the consumer industry for over 20 years. Since its inception in 2016, Chang has been focused on China's consumer industry. We have consistently invested in the new generation of brands and retail. Over the past few years, we have invested in more than 20 companies, including some new brands like October Ricefield, Genji Muyu, and Paper Household. There are also some offline chains in China, such as Qiandama, Guoquan, and Snacks Are Busy. I'm very happy to join Leo's podcast to have some exchanges with everyone.
These are all very well-known brands. Just joking, actually 3 years ago, there were a lot of new consumer investment firms in the market. 3 years later, among the friends I know, there are only a few institutions that still persist in investing in new consumer markets. Chang and Chang have always been unique, persisting in deeply cultivating this field, and their research is also done very well. I think this is also related to the early years, actually initially including JD.com, which has had a long-standing connection with today. Why don't you first talk about, as an investor in consumer goods from around 2017 or 2018 to now, which consumer brands do you think have been the most successful in the market? And who do you think is the typical representative among the ones you have invested in?
In the past, we all experienced a wave of consumer investment together. Probably from 2017 or 2018 up until 2021, there was a peak. I would extend this a bit further. Actually, I have been in the entire consumer market probably since around 2006, and we witnessed the transformation of China's retail infrastructure at that time. We witnessed together China's transition from online to offline, and of course from offline to online. Yes. The upgrade of the infrastructure platform in China included at that time JD.com and Tmall, and later on we had the whole wave of Douyin and Kuaishou, along with frequent retail. First of all, I think this is a massive infrastructure construction, and it is precisely this infrastructure construction that facilitated the rise of consumer brands during the 2018 time period. At that time, we had a diversified platform, and I think people would consider that starting from 2018, many new business models emerged on the platform, which actually still exist today. Online, we had short videos and live streaming, while offline, people started developing business models like front warehouses. And community group buying, which actually provided a great foundation for innovation. Some people even suggested that all these categories are worth redoing. So at this time, we witnessed a very exciting and dynamic process of consumer product entrepreneurship. After experiencing these years, when we look back, we might say that consumer investment, in my view, could enter an ice age, a very frozen period in a few years. If you ask me about very successful brands, to be honest, I haven't created that many. I might talk about our own achievements later. On the contrary, I want to discuss what systematic summaries and lessons industry practitioners might draw from this.
Conversely, let's talk about when the wave of new consumer brands emerged. It seems like you didn't invest in many. What was the investment logic behind not stepping into pitfalls?
If you pay attention to that time, you'll notice that those who were eager to invest amidst the hustle and bustle have probably stopped today and are even reflecting on it. On the contrary, Perhaps because we didn't follow the crowd to invest in some of the core, very popular companies, we might still be in the market and have a few reflections from our investments. First, we had high expectations, thinking we might have brands worth billions or tens of billions. But this hasn't happened on a large scale. We might even count and find that brands exceeding 3 billion or 5 billion are possibly.
For example, Yuanqi Forest was considered a top brand at the time, right? And then there's something like Pop Mart, right? There are about 3 to 5 of these kinds. 3 to 5?
On the contrary, in the companies we've invested in over the past few years, a few have emerged with revenues exceeding 5 billion, which might be quite surprising to everyone and perhaps not particularly noticed. Companies like Shiyudaoti and Jihu and Yuanxi Muyu have systematically surpassed 5 billion and have done so while achieving large-scale profitability. I joked with my colleagues that if we went back 5 years and told a group of peers investing in consumer goods that we might end up being the best investment firm among them because we invested in a rice brand, a furniture brand, and a household tissue brand, we would definitely be laughed at.
Yes, I was quite surprised before our meeting today. I roughly knew you invested in these, and when I thought about these categories, I felt, hey, there might be an issue here. Can these things really become brands? Can they be scaled up? Of course, it's a large category, right? But it raises a lot of questions. So I think we can have a serious discussion about the specific situations of these few and why you decided to invest in them at the time.
Yes, from an online perspective, when we systematize it, we might add baby care or a few others. I think we are, with these few companies of ours and perhaps adding others like Dirma, this should account for a significant proportion of scalable companies. When we look back at this matter later, I want to say that our entire industry at that time might have had some systemic biases in viewing this, which led to not meeting everyone's expectations. Moreover, a batch of companies received a lot of money, spent a lot of it one after another, but perhaps did not achieve the goals, and some of these businesses might not even exist today. So there are still some systemic challenges in this. From our perspective at Chang, when we reflect on this matter, what might we have overestimated? We might have overestimated the demand side, the impact of product innovation and marketing innovation, as well as how to make it sustainable in the end. But we might have underestimated the construction of a stable supply chain and its role as a barrier and the impact of this on brand building.
This is very interesting because it seems to complement what we've been emphasizing in many of our recent episodes, which is to create brands that grow with the user, starting from the user's needs. Indeed, this has been the biggest difference in essence between new consumer brands over the past 5 years, regardless of their success or failure, and traditional brands as they have completely grown from the user. But indeed, today they may have encountered some issues with scalability on a large scale. Why don't we start by talking about a basic category like Shiyue Daoqian, for example, and how they have built barriers in the supply chain to achieve scalability.
I am very willing to share with everyone the growth story of Shiyue Daoqian, which we invested in. They have been in business for about 12 or 13 years, and after our investment, they scaled up from 10 billion to 50 billion in revenue within 3 to 4 years. They achieved scalable profits and went public in Hong Kong, reaching a market value of around 100 billion in the process. I think this is a great example. Previously, we had many entrepreneurs in the food industry who created many new products and introduced new features. But Shiyue Daoqian, in contrast, focused on a very basic product that we use daily. They started with rice and achieved rapid growth to 50 billion in this category, becoming the #1 in all channels for mid to high-end rice in China. So I am very willing to talk about this with everyone because I used to work at JD.com, where I was in charge of JD's own brands. Therefore, I often looked at data from many categories on JD.com. I believe that at that time, those involved in consumer investment definitely went through a lot of category data. However, I believe that people might not have considered looking into categories like rice, flour, grains, and oil because it seemed that these categories were already well branded with strong competition and consumer satisfaction, and there shouldn't be much change.
Or I think from an abstract perspective, a universal challenge for such categories is that they are too close to agricultural products, and their level of deep processing is insufficient, making it difficult to brand them and differentiate them. This should be a common challenge, right?
When I looked at JD.com at the time, I was actually very surprised because when I checked the rice category, the second and third places were brands we are very familiar with called Golden Dragon Fish and Fortune. But the first and fourth places at the time were called October Rice Field and Firewood Courtyard, and later I found out they were made by the same company. Moreover, At that time, JD.com's data told me that this brand already accounted for about 25% to 30% of the market share in the rice category on their platform. I also checked the prices, and their products were generally sold at prices 50% higher than Golden Dragon, Fish, and Fortune. This was a huge surprise to me at the time, so I asked my colleagues in JD.com's procurement department to help me get in touch with this company. When we went to the Northeast to meet them, I asked if they had any secret to their success. Do you know anyone at JD.com? They said they hadn't actually met any senior executives at JD.com, but I asked them to tell me why they were able to achieve this in such a short time. What year was this? It was around 2020, at the start of the pandemic, and they told me the story of how they started their business. Actually, their family has been involved in grinding grain, processing, and collecting rice in the Northeast for decades. In 2012 or 2013, they sold their house in their hometown, brought 200,000 yuan in cash to Beijing, and set up a stall at the Wangfujing wholesale market, literally wholesaling rice bag by bag. Until one day, their customers, who often came to buy 5 or 10 bags of rice, were asked by his very astute wife, "Hey, where do you sell this rice? It doesn't seem like you're a big customer who can buy a lot." Later, they told her, "Hey, there's a place called JD Mall, which has now started to open up some categories beyond 3C, allowing the sale of daily necessities." They thought, if they can do it, so can we. So they went to establish a brand there. At that time, JD said, "I will also register a brand." They had a pretty good one in the Northeast. The rice was called Changli. And for example, an even better one called Wuchang, a place everyone is familiar with. Daohuaxiang is also considered one of the better rice varieties, but the price might be a little bit higher. At that time, Changlixiang might be sold for 4 or 5 yuan, and a pound of Daohuaxiang might be sold for 8 or 10 yuan, or even more expensive. At that time, I still remember that someone might say, I'll send you some good rice, right? Every time I go to the Northeast, someone will say, "I'll bring you some good rice." Everyone thinks it's a gift. In fact, this rice is produced in China. The supply is large, but due to high cost in offline supermarkets, it was difficult for everyone to sell it widely. It was baboon upbeat game time interrogation.
We established a brand there. They thought, oh, we can do that too. So they went to JD.com and said, I will also register a brand.
In Northeast China, but as life gradually improved, people were willing to pay a bit more for better rice. Everyone was quite willing. JD.com happened to gather more middle-class users during those years.
Consumption upgrading.
They were also very good at logistics, delivering to people's homes, so they focused solely on this channel, producing better rice, and created the brand October Rice Fields for Northeast Rice, and used Chaihuo Courtyard for Wuchang Rice. Then in just a few years, they used a capital of 200,000 yuan, and when I found them in 2020, they had almost exclusively operated on JD.com, reaching a scale of 1 billion yuan, with profits exceeding 100 million yuan. This was obviously far beyond my expectations.
Because this is a very typical example of what you might call a Taobao brand, Douyin brand, or JD.com brand, which are brands that have grown based on e-commerce channels. In fact, they are somewhat like brands that are added on top of the channel, because the upstream might be sourced in bulk, then repackaged and sold through e-commerce channels.
You put it very well. Would you call them a brand? There's one point I need to correct. They purchase rice from farmers, but they invest all the money they earn back into modern factories in the Northeast. They buy the best machines for glutinous rice from Switzerland, like sorting machines. In other words, at that time, they converted the billions they earned into the largest and most advanced production base in the Northeast. This logistics system is like JD's 7 warehouses. They can deliver goods to JD's 7 major warehouses within 3 days. It takes 1 day to produce from glutinous rice, and it might take 3 to 4 days to ship to JD. So often JD users at that time could buy rice produced within 10 to 15 days. You know, originally in China, the circulation of rice could take more than a year before we could consume it.
We only know old rice, right?
But this year, they harvested new rice, and then everyone could eat it, naturally leading to one thing happening. Users for the first time would perceive that, hey, this rice is different from what I had before.
It's because the time is short.
Short time.
Fresh.
So they made it fresh, and the rice variety is even better. So many users didn't immediately remember October rice fields at first, but after buying it many times, they realized, oh, this is the rice from JD. Gradually, they came to know, oh, it's JD, it's October rice fields. This is how they gradually transformed by making a better product themselves and then using their e-commerce operational capabilities to secure shelf space, gradually revealing their brand strength. So later, we discuss with them, if you have already become the #1 brand on e-commerce today, how can we expand to offline markets? Today, you are number one on JD, the top in JD's online supermarket. We need to find a way to become number one in offline supermarkets. Like, how can we get into Walmart and Yonghui? And then, can your product send to Sam's Club? In this way, you can connect both online and offline comprehensively. So at that time, he said, hey, this is very interesting. We have the opportunity to create a new mid to high-end omni-channel brand for rice in China. Later, indeed, what we envisioned was happening all along. JD and Tmall have secured various channels, achieving a market share of over 30%. Today, when they enter places like Hema, Sam's Club, and Pangdonglai, they are likely positioned as mid to high-end.
What is their current market share offline and online?
It's roughly 2/3 to 1/3.
There's 1/3 offline, right? Yes, 1/3 offline. Now, this is where I need to ask a crucial question. This kind of story is not hard to imagine across many categories, but the biggest challenge lies in the initial phase. For users or consumers, it feels more like a good product with high quality and reasonable price that they bought in the broader narrative of consumption upgrade on JD. Yes. Actually, people's memory of the brand name of rice isn't that strong. So from the perspective of the channel, there's a natural inclination to consider whether to support more, let's call them white label brands for now. Yes. With the emergence of brands, I can gain the most benefit. Conversely, from the brand's perspective, how can it counteract the interests of the channel? Because in the early stages, the value of your users, their impression, and your single sales channel were all provided by the same entity, all by JD.com. So how do you compete with the platform? How did it make this leap?
Okay, the question Leo asked is very crucial. The so-called new brands, especially those that have emerged in recent years, have the biggest opportunity by leveraging the transformation of China's new generation platforms, right? Initially, our brand definitely collaborates with the platform. You are the easiest to cooperate with. And I also want to make you a benchmark. At this point, pushing you to tens of billions is very easy. But to a certain extent, everyone's goals will definitely diverge. Brands will want to explore multiple channels. After doing JD.com, I also want to do Tmall. Meanwhile, platforms will think, I can't give all the benefits to you. You've set an example, and I hope you can drive everyone else. So resources will inevitably be gradually distributed. This is why in many categories, we see the energy of early innovators gradually being distributed to others. I think this is very easy to understand. However, in some categories, you need to find your player, someone who has access to resources that are difficult for others to obtain. In our view, there is only one thing that is most solid, and that is the barrier of your supply chain. So going back to the example of October Paddy Field, the Northeast is certainly full of granaries, and many people in China are there. However, today, how many people can invest perhaps 500 million or 1 billion to build large-scale production plants with such efficiency? There are not many left. Secondly, having such production and logistics efficiency, being able to meet the high B2C, fulfillment demands like JD.com and Tmall did back in the day, for example, having the logistics capability to send to JD.com's 7 regional warehouses and possibly 100 to 200 city warehouses is actually very rare in the entire Northeast. For example, if Dong Yuhui recites a poem in front of the screen, like the wind blowing through the rice fields, people may be infected by it. People might be moved by this. It could result in 100,000 orders of rice, but in the entire Northeast, there are very few rice merchants who can ship 100,000 orders in a single day. I believe that aside from October rice fields, it's almost impossible to find another company. So this is the situation we see where many of these companies are very good at creating concepts to capture some of the platform's spillover effects. However, consistently aligning their supply with very large-scale e-commerce, especially with this kind of pulse-like demand, is a very difficult task.
I can understand that in this process, there will definitely be such a demand for value, and indeed, the supply will be relatively scarce. Capabilities like supply chain shipping and warehousing. But in China, although we may not understand this specific industry now, within a broadly defined industry, it's easy to elevate such logistics and warehousing capabilities to overcapacity. There might be a period, 1 or 2 years, where 1 or 2 companies do very well, but it can easily become a kind of infrastructure over time because everyone realizes that I can transport rice, I can also transport soybeans, and I can transport other things. So will this lead to such capabilities being turned into infrastructure, allowing more so-called brands to have them, which would essentially dissolve this barrier? I don't know if this issue will arise. For example, when the older generation was in the rice business, they would definitely lease the land, build the factory, and might even have contracts with farmers for their rice.
But what is the problem they encounter? It's that I actually lack high quality sales.
Yes.
Right? But today, we see companies like October Rice Fields, which have secured a stable supply on numerous major platforms in China and achieved a certain premium. Stabilizing this demand is the most important thing, such as ensuring consistency. Once you have stabilized this, you can then go back and direct your supply chain, providing a stable order to the farmers and even consistently purchase from them at better prices. I think the best thing about e-commerce in the past year is that it constantly plays a survivor's game. Ultimately, we see that especially at the supply chain stage, the front end appears to be decentralized, but due to the bullwhip effect in the supply chain, it actually ends up with a strong Matthew effect. This turns a very open loop business at the front end into one where success depends on who can establish barriers in the upstream supply chain.
Are you worried, as someone who was originally responsible for JD's strategic investment department and later worked on HeyGen, that JD's people might go out and say, I saw this because this story can be seen from JD's perspective?
This has already happened. JD directly approached the manufacturers in Wuchang and said, let's hold a Wuchang Rice Festival. This happened, but even with the mobilization of all the forces in Wuchang, none could shake Shiyue Daotian. Today, Shiyue Daotian alone might be selling about 20% of Wuchang's production.
Okay, so this might still be a game of market share, right? Right. In this context, does offline play a significant role in this competition? Because if all your channels, I don't know how much of his business now comes from JD or from a single channel. If everything comes from a single channel, then you might always be constrained by that channel, right? But if it's offline, offline involves a broader range of channels because offline might be a combination of multiple channels. Wouldn't that give more bargaining power?
I think today, no matter which channel you start from, you must have a starting channel and you must find a way to not just be among the top, but to be the absolute number one. If you have an online foundation, there is actually a certain brand spillover and overall energy spillover. Then find a way to use this to enter a channel. For example, what would the connection chain be today? If you are the number one in JD supermarket, when you go to Walmart and Yonghui today, the terms you get are actually not inferior to any top offline brand at the time, as they use their product strength and brand strength to enter Sam's Club. When you can enter Sam's Club and Pangdonglai, all offline supermarkets today that focus on quality will be on par with you.
I understand. This is truly like a kind of white label growth. In the process of becoming a brand, what they are doing is because scale can definitely bring you some opportunities and advantages. You just repeatedly emphasize the open and closed loop of the supply chain, which is actually a very interesting case. Do you have other brands as well? I believe that the stories are quite similar, whether it's the original story you mentioned or Jihu. Yes. The logic is similar, and the common challenge they face is how to establish their own barriers while growing from a white label to a brand. I believe there are many such investments in the supply chain. Are there any similar cases that allow you to compare and say that back then you chose this category or this company over another due to certain characteristics in its supply chain?
Let me start by saying that when we reviewed the situation at the time, during the period when the entire market was focused on consumer investments, we felt that there was an overemphasis on the demand side. In fact, very few founders or investors were genuinely concerned about the supply side, and we were among the few who were. I once discussed an issue with a founder in the food industry. He said that 2 or 3 years ago, when he was developing this product, which was very successful, investors were all seeking him out and asking about one thing. They said his ROA was excellent and urged him to continue expanding channels and to invest quickly. But he said that none of the investors ever asked him about how he solved the factory issue or whether it was important to build a factory. They used contract manufacturers, but he said it was only last year that they realized they ultimately needed to build their own factory. If you observe what we've been doing over the past few years, which has been a crucial step in the past decade, you'll see that Zhang Liaoyuan recently did a few things. First, he built a large factory in Wuhu and another in Tianjin. Over the new year, he took the entire team to Australia to study the sourcing of macadamia nuts. You'll notice that Zhang Liaoyuan refers to this as catching up on lessons. So today, among entrepreneurs, there is a systemic lack of understanding and appreciation for the upstream supply chain. Here at HeyGen, we recognized this early on and later summarized it as almost the only differentiation and barrier building strategy, especially if you want to create and lead a stronghold. This is almost the only differentiation and barrier building strategy. Release it. As long as you want to lead this category, add more to lead this category. Right. There will always be someone who will work on your topic, right. But he said that none of the investors ever asked him about how he solved the factory issue or whether he ultimately needed to build a factory. We use contract manufacturers. But he said that it was only last year that he started saying we ultimately need to build a factory. 3 squirrels led by Zhang Luoyuan built factories in, right? Secondly, if you don't have this, you actually don't have a final profit area, so everyone will be burning money. Therefore, the companies we initially invested in, I should say, were all carefully examined, and ideally, they need to have a certain exclusive supply chain to achieve this. I want to share with you another investment story of ours, which is in the home furnishing industry, something that more and more people are becoming aware of, called Original Wood Language, because this company actually makes solid wood furniture. In recent years, the question I get asked the most, including from some overseas investors, is that they understand why the companies we invest in, like rice, are doing so well because Chinese people want to eat well. But they ask, isn't the real estate market in China not doing well? So why has your home furnishing business increased 7 or 8 times over the years, even directly reaching, you just mentioned it seems to have basically reached a scale of 10 billion? Yes, I am really very surprised. Many people probably didn't expect that they could reach this scale, but the reason why it grew so fast, and throughout this process, there hasn't been a second large-scale brand. It's just them leading far ahead, possibly reaching 10 billion, with no second company in the industry. To a large extent is because they are also involved upstream. Although they don't build factories themselves, they have formed a very stable upstream supply base similar to Toyota's just-in-time system, allowing them to achieve a 10 billion brand. If you look at the home furnishing industry in recent years, if you want to pursue some quality, Original Wood Language might be a home furnishing brand you often see. Because the principle was simple from the start, they just make solid wood furniture. Solid wood has a very big advantage, which is that it's environmentally friendly. They have also done a lot of product innovation because the style of solid wood aligns well with the trends of recent years, such as our new Chinese style, Japanese style, and Nordic style. Moreover, they have made significant extensions later on, like painting solid wood in black, white, and gray, perfectly combining it with the popular Italian light luxury style of recent years.
Solve the aesthetic issue, the issue for young people.
Aesthetic issue. Moreover, because of the unlimited online shelves, they actually have almost 20,000 SKUs, 1 or 2 10,000 SKUs, and this involves different performances. Just within solid wood, there might be oak, walnut, cherry wood.
The key question is, how expensive is it?
That's a very good question.
Pricing issue.
Initially, they sold a piece, for example, a 1.8 meter solid wood bed, initially for 1,000 yuan.
Solid wood.
Solid wood bed, 1.8 me, solid wood.
The first reaction people might have is it really solid wood?
Yes. When they first started, it might have been about the same or a bit more expensive than IKEA, but they could significantly upgrade from board material to solid wood compared to IKEA. Now, basically, if you use their furniture to fully furnish a 3-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment, it might cost around 50,000 to 70,000 yuan.
Oh, that's all it takes. That's really cheap.
The cost-performance ratio is very high, and then
how do they achieve that? Because generally speaking, solid wood is expensive because the raw materials are costly. There's a reason for it.
So when we saw this company being able to sell at that price, I was also quite surprised when we conducted our own research on the supply chain. All the furniture placed there from end to end, from the factory to the market, the price increases by about 5 times. That's because there are roughly 2 levels of agency sales cycles, which might take 6 months to a year. However, today, if you're willing to order furniture from the industrial belt in Jiaozhou Bay, Shandong, and have it delivered to your home, the initial markup is actually only about 30% because
there are no middlemen taking a cut.
There are no middlemen taking a cut, and you might even pay them first. They produce it there and then send it to you. With this, you see the same quality at possibly a third of the price. Initially, consumers might not quite believe it, so at the beginning, they sold very basic items like beds, bookshelves, and wardrobes, which are not particularly differentiated products, focusing on functionality, because I still don't quite believe. Understood. I wanted to address some issues between sellers and buyers, but gradually people started to trust the quality and the price, and they also really saw that their designs were gradually improving. So over the years, they have become rich in variety and have become the number one in this category.
But there's still a key question here, which is why was solid wood furniture so expensive originally? Why do middlemen make a profit on the price difference? Actually, as you just mentioned, firstly, it's because the turnover is slow. We know that solid wood furniture used to require customization, right? It's raw materials. I don't know if they are as standardized as boards, so this leads to the need to measure dimensions and customize. So you have to place an order first and then make it, which makes the entire cycle very long. And the cycle to acquire customers is even longer, which results in a potentially long sales cycle. A long sales cycle means that multiple layers of people are needed to advance the funds, which leads to price increases. There must be reasons for such a situation to form. So today, how does selling online address the key steps in this process, allowing it to achieve such a low markup rate while at least not losing money in doing so?
I think it's necessary to say that our Chinese super e-commerce platforms are actually leading globally, using business model improvements to genuinely enhance everyone's cost effectiveness, and significantly so. For example, many of us have been consumers for 10 or 20 years. And you'll notice that when China was primarily composed of production and supply companies, to push our fast-moving consumer goods from the factory to the consumer's hands, the markup was typically around 2.5 to 4 times, right? For clothing, the markup is definitely pushed forward by 5 to 10 times, which is because of our overall distribution efficiency. All of this involves distribution and branding, which all reflect efficiency. Back then, when we had the first wave of e-commerce, as long as something could be bought online, people were familiar with it and they would go to the store. During the e-commerce era, as long as you could buy something online, people were familiar with it and it might already be sold at a 30% discount in stores. Today, what we see is that a few years ago, I shared a formula with my colleagues. I said that for these fast-moving consumer goods, as long as we create our own brand or a new generation brand today, it will basically be at half the price of what we call the original mainstream domestic brands. And then, for our durable consumer goods, like large items such as clothing and furniture, if you switch to direct sales today, it will definitely be at 30% of the price or less. So today, this price difference is the efficiency gap between the two business models of online and offline in China.
I understand. So actually, it's still relying on D2C business model innovation. This eliminates the middlemen and relies on better digital demand forecasting to shorten the supply cycle. I think the most interesting part of these two cases is that a mainstream narrative, including my own previous concern, was that the bargaining power of the channels is too strong. Doing it this way is fine. It definitely brings benefits to consumers and also creates value. But doing it this way will lead to the original brand value being destroyed, right? And on the other hand, when channels further penetrate into the realm of the brand and product itself, for example, by creating private labels, you see offline supermarkets also creating many private labels. Everyone starts making products, even taking the most profitable items to make themselves. This leads to the entire cycle, especially when you add a very fast feedback loop, but without the resources, time, and energy to invest, similar to R&D investment to create better products, including targeting more segmented groups. So everyone ends up making generic products with prices getting lower and lower, but the quality is not necessarily guaranteed. If we take some examples, actually in highly competitive fields like cosmetics, many other areas are indeed experiencing this. I believe you must have encountered many such cases, right? So how do you identify which categories have the opportunity to compete in front of the channels and create long-term value?
What you just mentioned is a phenomenon that is generally recognized by everyone. I partially agree with it, but there are aspects that are quite different from what I have observed and what I am doing myself. People will definitely think that with platforms being so competitive, represented by Pinduoduo and Douyin, you must have stripped away the brand value that everyone originally relied on for survival. Yes. Moreover, by focusing heavily on pricing power, it has exploited the surplus of our manufacturers. So it seems that this situation is being portrayed as everyone being driven by price, as if entering a negative cycle. Everyone is very worried about this matter. I actually agree with the earlier part, but later on, I noticed some situations. Today, the first point is that we don't talk about whether it's a brand or not. We focus on whether our new supply is enhancing the value for users. This value, I usually see it in 3 aspects. The first aspect is whether we can improve performance at the basic level and whether people are using products with better performance. Better with more functions. Yes, performance needs to improve, just like Mr. Lei said. When running a benchmark, everything needs to have improved performance. The second aspect is whether the cost effectiveness has improved. On this basis, my performance has become better. But we must say today that on the platform, the performance in many categories has significantly upgraded. I agree. The biggest challenge in this process is that due to intense competition, our manufacturers haven't achieved continuous growth. The life cycle of a product I make often becomes very short, and then I have to make the next one. I can't build a reputation because in the previous seller's market, making a good product, what we call a super single product, I might be able to rely on this single product for 10 years. Today, a product of mine might complete its life cycle in just 1 or 2 years.
So throughout this entire process, I acknowledge that consumers have received better products, creating value. Platforms and channels have also achieved large-scale commercialization through this method and have gained value. Yes. Today, perhaps the main issue is that the creators of these products, whether it's the factories themselves or what we call brands, the value they receive is becoming increasingly thin. This is likely the main conflict here. Indeed.
So how do we break through this situation? Certainly, we see many companies, for example, on platforms like Douyin, enjoying a much shorter cycle of innovation dividends.
It's like the nutrients for the channels, yes.
It has become the fertilizer for the platforms. But in the process, everyone really needs to think about what their core barriers are, which is why we emphasize the barriers in the supply chain so much. Original Ranch previously managed to achieve a scale of several billion online, but there is still a significant consumer pain point that hasn't been addressed. Users always feel uneasy about buying such large items like furniture, especially when it comes to style, without seeing or touching them first. Yes. So over the past few years, they have gradually started opening offline stores. Initially, they also opened in Red Star McAllen, but because they have online traffic, they never need to ask offline platforms to buy the most expensive entry point. They can establish a connection with users by choosing a spot on the 4th or 5th floor at the far end using the lowest rent. When users see it, the conversion rate is very high. For example, if an online purchase is around 5,000 to 8,000 yuan, when they go offline, they might buy a more premium set of walnut furniture for 40 to 50,000 yuan. In recent years, they have already opened over 1,000 stores so far in so fast furniture malls and shopping centers. And by this time, it only took a few years, 2 to 3 years, for half of its sales in this category to come from offline. So you can see that in recent years, the company's scale has been increasing, gross profit is also growing, and most importantly, consumer satisfaction and reputation are continuously improving. We precisely see that this company can start from online and stabilize. Initially, your supply chain is your foundation, allowing you to enter the market, stabilize your market share, resist competition, and protect your profits. Through capability, you enter all channels, and once you have established your presence, you then begin to build the brand along this path.
Understood. I am thinking in these two cases, if we delve deeper, is there a common characteristic, which is that the crucial issue here is market share. How much market share do you hold in this vertical niche category? In these two cases, there is an interesting point, which is that it involves a typical innovation in consumer goods at the time, meaning finding innovative subcategories within large categories, like wuchang rice or rice in general. These are well known, but in fact, they don't hold a high proportion in the consumption share of Chinese people. However, everyone wants to eat them. When you can provide a high cost performance supply to users, its market share can expand rapidly, and perhaps its share in this niche track is already quite high. As you just mentioned, the same goes for solid wood. The furniture market is very large, but the market for solid wood furniture is not that big. However, everyone wants to use solid wood furniture, but they just can't afford it, thinking it's expensive, right? If it can solve the issue of being expensive, it can similarly expand its market share in the solid wood furniture sector. At the same time, in this smaller niche market, it might have a relatively large share, allowing it to address some upstream supply chain control or barrier issues. Conversely, speaking of more open large categories, for example, the one we talk about the most is similar to beauty products. Beauty products, personal care, clothing. In the case of clothing, it's about competing in the market, but when its supply chain, production, manufacturing, and branding are all highly technologically structured, it's difficult for any company to capture a sufficiently large share in a niche category. Therefore, it inevitably falls into a process of multi-party competition. Isn't it true that there are such choices in the market?
That's exactly right. This is what we concluded from the last round of consumer investment. We believe the biggest pitfall was that everyone approached it top down, saying this is a trend, the opportunity is huge, the market is large, and growth is rapid, so everyone invested in these areas. And at that particular time, our investment strategy was in a way that was completely the opposite. Instead of judging whether a particular market was good or bad, we focused on individual cases within those markets.
It seems like the markets you chose weren't considered the best at first glance.
Because our approach wasn't top-down, where you choose people based on the market. In the past, in the internet sector, people would choose the market first and then the players, right? But at that time, we carefully observed why, in certain categories, regardless of whether we thought the category was good or bad, there was already a group of people who had scaled up in that field without taking any of our money. and they had already reached 10 billion and were quite profitable. Why did we raise this question? So in the end, our reflection led us to the conclusion that the ultimate goal is to create a scalable brand for consumers to use. So ultimately, you have to focus on building a good brand, and there are inherent reasons for that. It's just that at that point, for a long time, many people asked us why, if you could create a brand with rice, you wouldn't do the same with flour, grains, and oils, right? In the end, the core realization when we established the brand October Rice Fields was, wow, I discovered such a great formula. I thought, let me look at others. Unfortunately, there aren't such opportunities elsewhere because in this category, if you don't have an end-to-end approach, combining supply chain innovation, product innovation, and channel innovation, it might not exist. Our conclusion was that it doesn't exist. On the contrary.
So you have looked into other grains and oils?
Yes. We even thought, surely if we have this capability, why don't we apply it? But no. Objectively speaking, with today's platform, innovation in China and supply innovation, every category as a whole has significantly improved over the past few years. However, not every category level advancement will necessarily benefit a specific winner.
Right.
And for us to invest and align with a continuous winner, that's where we have the chance to win, rather than just the industry progressing.
Yes.
During the process, the winners keep changing hands, which is actually the most painful part for investors.
Indeed, it's the story of pursuing success rate versus winning rate.
Yes, so let us come back and look at today. Let me look at this batch again. It is better that you are still in a funny situation, but today it is not necessarily driven by opportunities. Maybe today we may look at your ability. Capability driven, right? And of course, many people come in and turn it into a competition saying, I have no barriers, so I quickly add resources, scale up, thinking that will create barriers. And at this point, the harm to investment and entrepreneurship might be greater, accelerating something, right? The waste of resources might be even more.
Yes. This is very interesting because it reminds me of our internal discussions, whether it's our own entrepreneurship or when we look at different tracks. Many of our businesses ultimately abstract this into a debate about opportunity versus capability. In the past 10 to 20 years, Chinese entrepreneurs have indeed been categorized into different types, with a large portion focusing on seizing opportunities. That is, everyone looks at what the trends are, what opportunities there are. Basically, it's easier to get funding, easier to acquire resources, and easier to succeed, which is correct, right? But there's another group that focuses on capabilities, which is about what kind of abilities are developed in the process, right? How can this capability be accumulated? I think the ultimate outcome is that this matter cannot be biased. That is, those who focus on capabilities, when they encounter trends and opportunities, they expand. Similarly, those who focus on trends, if they build capabilities in the process, they also do well. However, if one only focuses on one side throughout the entire process, they will eventually be dissolved by various forces. For example, in branding, there are actually two groups of people.
The founders' backgrounds are quite different, especially the founders we invest in. Balance capabilities. The founders we invest in often build online brands, and many of them entered the market 2010 or 2013. Okay. At that point, later, in the bustling new consumer brands, many people entered in 2017 or 2018. And if you look at their backgrounds, they often come from large brand companies because with some product managers, what is the advantage of this point? He has great insight into products. He knows very well, for example, if I come from Procter & Gamble, I know that our previous generation of products actually can no longer meet today's trends. How do I upgrade this to create a combination, including value points that is closer to the user? Moreover, I am very adept at using new channel transformations. You use offline, you use JD.com, Tmall. How can we use live streaming today? Make good use of short videos, Xiaohongshu, and these KOC models. They are very strong in this, and everyone creates some new paradigms, which are great at the beginning, right? However, the challenge is that during this process, of course, you definitely need supply chain support. As your innovative points are leaked and learned by others at a low cost, this single innovation does not completely solve the problem. The product is continuously iterating and innovating, working on matching performance and price. A good product ultimately needs to be iterated many times, and it should be developed into a series by expanding a super single product both upwards and downwards. This is something we have been researching extensively internally recently, the ability for continuous product development and evolution. This has already become a supply-side capability, especially when it comes to development, particularly when you need to deeply integrate with the supply chain, meaning that the product may need to be iterated several more times. Think about it. How many times has a single product like a robotic vacuum cleaner been iterated in recent years? Even some of the best companies in China have missed 1 or 2 generations in this area, right? Yes. Initially, it only vacuumed, then it needed to mop, and then it had to wash the mop, and so on.
Let's put it this way. Theoretically, this should fall under the category of Medea, right? But obviously, a batch of companies emerged later. We know how strong Medea is in terms of supply chain and brand.
Companies like Medea, Xiaomi, and even new companies. With each round of product iteration and innovation, there are always some who can't keep up. This process can easily cause entrepreneurs to fall behind in multiple rounds of competition. However, let's look at another group in this industry. Initially, they didn't actively innovate, but they are latecomers who possess capabilities on the supply chain side, benefiting from the spillover of your innovations. And let's not forget one important thing. China's super platforms are constantly taking the best marketing innovations and strategies from excellent companies and equalizing them, giving them to others, so that we all succeed and everyone can use it with one click. In fact, these people gradually gain the advantage of being latecomers. Yes. Moreover, these people steadily advance from the supply side, easily securing one stronghold after another, stabilizing market share, which becomes a source of profit in the future, thus continuing to iterate in this way. So later, we observe the competition between 2 types of founders in many categories. Typically, founders on the demand side start by guiding the product and leading the concept, establishing the category. However, gradually, some players from the supply side will follow up and secure the ground. So going back to that time, you would see founders like those of Shiyue Daotian, Genji Bath, Jihu, and Dierma. They don't have particularly high academic backgrounds. They have been working hard in this industry for maybe 10 to 20 years. Initially, they learned from the first wave of e-commerce like JD.com and Tmall about how to build channels that can accumulate. They have already stabilized their supply chain, operations team, and all these processes. When it came to high-pulse marketing battles like Douyin or live streaming, they were definitely quite confused at first.
Right.
But as the game gradually shifted from being creativity-driven to focusing on their product and operations, the balance started to tip in their favor.
I think this conversation has been really enlightening. We might have repeatedly mentioned in this program that we only saw one layer of the cycle reversal. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a narrative of consumption upgrading. During this process, people were not as concerned about cost effectiveness from an objective standpoint, but rather focused on quality or performance improvements. However, the actual price increase multiplier was higher, which allowed many new consumer brands to enjoy the benefits. They were better at defining brands from the user's perspective and innovating in marketing, among other things. This wave has been reversed by the state of the past 2 years, right? So perhaps we only saw a cycle reversal on the demand side. But I think you brought up a more interesting topic, which is whether we have a first mover advantage or a late mover advantage, and where we are accumulating our capabilities. Today, those who are most skilled at understanding user needs, defining products, acting as product managers, and doing marketing on the user side have indeed led global innovation in these areas over the past 5 to 10 years. But this is like technological innovation. Technological innovation that progresses too quickly is not a good thing for the supply chain, as it can leave generations of people stranded on the beach. And today, those who can accumulate more advantages on the back end, in the supply chain, and who can retain their position may not currently be the best at defining users, understanding user needs, or designing and packaging products as brands. However, they can learn and maintain their strengths, gradually improving in areas where they are less skilled, because competition in those areas is intense and equalization happens quickly. They can catch up and perform well there, and in the process of this cyclical reversal, they at least achieve a temporary victory. So I think this might not just be a story of cyclical reversal. It's also about choosing which battlefield to fight on and where to accumulate your capabilities.
You know, at the beginning of this year, I took 30 to 40 founders from our retail sector on a trip to Japan. I've always wanted to explain to everyone how China is transitioning from an era of growth to an era of stock and how businesses need to adjust. How do you make that clear to people? After thinking about it for a long time, I realized the best way was to take them to Japan. When we went to Japan, the essence was to show everyone one thing. After Japan experienced its lost 30 years, their products became both good and cheap. Today, there's no problem with wanting to offer good things to people. Yes, good and cheap. I remember something particularly interesting. We went to a famous discount chain store in Japan called OK, right? In front of it, there might be a sign saying everyday low price, which we are very familiar with, similar to Sam Walton's concept, but they added high quality in front of it. At the entrance of a Japanese fast food restaurant, there are only three big words: tasty, quick, value. So today, Japan finally told us that when we complete the cycle and enter a stock society, this is something where I want both quality and affordability. Of course, if you can add emotional value to this, then in the end, we say that today it's not just about turning into stock and directly competing on price. Instead, it's about having a good price while adding emotional value. This is the gold standard that our long-distance marathon runners can win with.
Yes. You mentioned the food and beverage industry. Let me give a preview. We will soon have a discussion about Caesarea, which is also a very interesting story. How they make 20 yuan pasta and steak and have possibly become the largest Western restaurant chain in the world. So this is also a very interesting story. I actually want to delve further into this, as there is quite an important aspect regarding the choice of field and track. In 2021 and 2022, I also talked with many emerging brands. During that process, they actually noticed that they needed to build factories and supplement the supply chain, but soon a group of them withdrew or encountered difficulties. First, the construction of the supply chain is not that fast. Secondly, during the process of building the supply chain, this became an additional burden for them because the supply chain itself is a process that requires heavy investment. So during the reversal of the cycle, the investment in the supply chain actually became a significant burden, and the barriers and accumulated advantages that were expected from the investment did not materialize. So similarly, I was actually thinking that in the past 1 or 2 years, a very popular topic in consumer goods has been the concept of 10,000 store chains. The offline chains have been expanding very actively and in large numbers, and I believe you have invested in a few of them. But in the recent 3 to 5 months, there have actually been some negative voices, such as a wave of large-scale store closures or the second-hand equipment dealers being overwhelmed and so on. I'm actually very curious about how to make category selections in this process, which is still related to our initial discussion on consumer goods. When discussing consumer goods over a decade ago, the primary issue was always how to make category selections. Of course, back then, when making category selections, there might have been a set of theories about the value of certain categories and the long-term benefits a brand could generate within them. But today, you might present some cases showing that I don't necessarily have to follow that set of judgment logic to create a great brand. But no matter how you approach it, category selection remains a crucial topic. I wonder if we consider it from the perspective of offline chains, including some cases from Japan, do you think there are any experiences or lessons in category selection? All right.
Okay, if what we discussed earlier was mostly about HeyGen's journey over the past few years, starting primarily as an online brand and eventually becoming a national brand through omni-channel strategies, then another area where HeyGen has been very focused and heavily invested in recent years is developing offline chains. We are probably among the companies that have invested the most in offline chains. In the past few years, for example, we have invested in over 30,000 offline franchise chain food stores. Today, there are over 3,000 of these chains located in shopping centers. Among these, some might mention the 10,000 stores concept. In the past, we have invested in stores around community streets, such as Qiandama, which sells fresh meat, and Guoquan, which offers frozen foods and hot pot barbecue ingredients, both having over 10,000 stores. Additionally, Lingxi Henmang has also surpassed 10,000 stores. There are also brands like Xueji Chaohuo and Xinjiayi convenience stores. This is another realization we've had over the past few years. Actually, this is still related to what you've seen, which is that in the past, China's online infrastructure has been leading globally over the last decade. However, China's offline infrastructure has been built over the past 20 to 30 years through urbanization, providing us with another stage for infrastructure development. We should have tens of thousands of such communities that have built new towns where people have moved from rural areas to our second to fifth tier towns and cities, living according to their purchasing power and housing prices. A large number of new communities have been established. Then, once you have a community, you usually find that there are ground floor shops divided into one grid after another right downstairs. And then, within 3 to 5 kilometers, we have built another larger big box, which is our shopping center. Yes. In fact, this is the biggest change in China's offline infrastructure over the past 20 years, and this has also driven changes in China's offline business formats. The reason is simple. How did the 10,000 stores come about? I would say it's because in China's lower tier cities, which we call towns today, this is actually China's mainstream market, We've calculated that 7 to 900 million people might live in these third-tier and below towns.
Yes, because calling it a sinking market is not accurate. It's actually China's mainstream market.
When they move to these new towns, the supply is actually not that sufficient. Previously, I would cook and eat beautifully every day, but today, after moving to a new town, there might not be a nearby vegetable market, or the original market format can no longer satisfy the users. And what about when they go to the supermarket? First, it's far, and second, although supermarkets have been focusing on fresh produce in recent years, users often say, can you offer better and more convenient options in this category? People mainly find that the supply is actually insufficient. But running a supermarket is very difficult. Look at today. We say, oh, why doesn't Pangdonglai expand beyond one city district? Because expanding a supermarket today is extremely difficult, right? However, why do we have so many chain stores today? It's because they take a segment or a category from the supermarket and focus on it. For example, Chendama focuses on the meat section, right? They manage the meat well, pair it with related products, and establish a specialized supply chain that extends upstream, from procurement to processing, advancing it within a range of 60 to 80 kilometers. Do you see if there is already a space in your local commercial area waiting for you? Moreover, there are franchisees willing to invest 200,000 to 300,000 yuan a year to open a store. If you can help me break even in 1 to 2 years, I would be very willing to serve my neighbors with enthusiasm and effort, right? At this point, the foundation for a chain of 10,000 stores, starting with a single store, gradually takes shape. At this point, it connects with users who say they want better quality and more convenience. I might pass by this neighborhood every day, and I can buy what I need without waiting for e-commerce or going to the market. On the other side, this small store is actually connected to a professional supply chain. Today, within this circle, it meets a specific demand. Initially, it was about allowing me to enjoy hot pot in a specialized way. In a supermarket, there might only be a few items, but here there are 300 to 400 SKUs. What do I want to eat? Various specialty items like yellow throat, tripe, cold chain shrimp paste, and fish balls are all available, very professional. Behind this, I am directly connected to the factory upstream in the supply chain. This forms the simplest end-to-end business model in China. Factory, then possibly a processing center, and then the store. At this point, we are still providing better products. Back when we were investing, we would definitely first say, look at why the chain rate for each category in the US is so high. While here, when we look at our top ranks, it's only a few percentage points. But in recent years, because we have introduced the franchise chain model, the chain rate in various industries in China is rapidly increasing, right? In some high categories like milk tea, it might have already surpassed 40, 50%, coffee even higher, and many of our basic categories are also increasing.
But what's very interesting is that it's not the people we imagined back then who are increasing the chain rate, nor is it the models we imagined at the time that are increasing the chain rate. It has restructured the entire industry chain. I was just thinking, this actually illustrates that creating a chain of 10,000 stores and the national brand we talked about at the beginning, which emphasizes value for money, are fundamentally connected. Simply put, there are no middlemen making a profit, right? They all chose a niche to compress the intermediate distribution links, right? The distribution links have been compressed, yes, but the difference lies in the fact that these online brands need to leverage the infrastructure benefits and advantages brought by the channels. Whereas these offline brands with a chain of 10,000 stores need to build a single store model themselves. This single store model is where I have segmented a more detailed demand from the original demand, using a better experience and a stronger supply chain. Actually, what you mentioned, including brands like Mixue Bingcheng, all have very strong capabilities in the supply chain. Yes, they can directly deliver the advantages of the factory to a small store around your community, allowing you to experience it. So in this way, its value on the channel side is, in a sense, even stronger than online brands, because after all, these channels are a network of thousands of stores, not reliant on just one entity, right? In this process, it should be able to gain greater value. And as for itself, it has merely established a channel to sell its raw materials. It is not truly operating the 2C end of things. It feels like these companies are essentially 2B companies. Inherently,
they are B2B2C companies.
B2B2C.
A whole supply chain network.
Yes. So this should be the distinction. I think the next question, which I'm sure you must have considered, is that milk tea is something visible on the table, everyone sees it, but this opportunity quickly disappears, or rather the market share is basically already divided. Now you are dealing with meat, and Chendama doesn't sell overnight meat. I'm specifically dealing with meat. Guoquan is dealing with hot pot ingredients. That is frozen food. Frozen food, right? Then you must have thought about what else in the entire supermarket category can be taken out to do, or what is the pattern between what can be taken out to do and what cannot.
Today at the front end, there are indeed just a few steps. The first step is definitely to create a single store with user value based on user needs. At this point, the core is to first address the user's needs. You see, in this case, Qiandama, the most crucial part is actually the meat store, because people in the south want to eat warmer meat. Yes. Warm meat, fresh? Yes. I can choose myself. Based on such a need, Guoquan allows me to buy everything I need for hot pot in one place, and it must be diverse. Yes, snacks are very popular. This type of business model simultaneously solves the problem of allowing me to eat snacks, and in a 100 square meter space, it can accommodate 1,500 SKUs. Moreover, it offers bulk sales, which is a form that the traditional market used to present. Yes, the form it presents. Moreover, it sells some low-value categories such as eggs, cakes, candies, where a pound might often cost 10 yuan, and for 20 yuan, you can, yes, weigh a pound. Individual items are sold in bulk, and you can buy them one by one. This uses a modern chain model to recreate the bulk buying user experience from our traditional markets.
Yes, I don't know if everyone has some memories of this. Actually, I recently went to such a store right in an old residential community near my home. It reminded me of 20 or 30 years ago, where you could buy various snacks in bulk, along with all kinds of pastries sold at very cheap prices, and there were many snacks you hadn't tried before. Actually, today's famous snacks are about taking that model and redoing it in a modernized chain store way using packaged food methods.
They've redone it. And today, at the same time, the first thing is that they definitely offer you better product selections.
Of course.
And better recommendations. More importantly, as they just mentioned, by improving supply chain efficiency, they can offer the same products at a 30% discount, enabling them to create a discount store format, right? In this context, Coca-Cola is also sold for only 1.8 yuan, right? Nongfu Spring is sold for 1.4 yuan, so it means that within the smallest single store model, it has accumulated enough user value. That is to say, how do I take an existing user demand and provide it with a more advanced business model? Once you do this, there's an opportunity to scale it up significantly. At this point, you gain an ability and you quickly return to our previous model, reaching the supply side to find your other footing. For Lingshi Henmang, it might be about the system of scalable product selection, procurement, certification, and logistics fulfillment, and how to achieve both scale and efficiency. For Qiandama, it might mean you need to have meat, and today, besides meat and fish, also vegetables and fruits. In this way, from procurement to processing, especially the processing stage, you need to make significant investments to turn this area into your core competitive advantage. For Guoquan, even more so, because it might need to hire hundreds of CEOs, it must directly connect upstream to each category, finding those with strong food safety standards who can supply on a large scale and keep up. When you think about Guoquan reaching 10 billion, their procurement of upstream raw materials is already equivalent to the entire upstream procurement of Haidilao. So I think what we've seen over the past few years, you see all the restaurants we've invested in, why are they all related to food? Yes, why? Because with food, indeed, it's because in China, this is where the consumer demand side is most prominent. You see, in Japan, even though I spend more conservatively overall, right, but I allocate more to essentials. And also, the quality requirements are higher. In this regard, my quality requirements are higher. It's an upgrade. And in China, previously, if we carefully look at the Chinese food industry, although we have a lot of unique features and so many things inside, the overall level of our food industry is not high. So there is a huge opportunity here. Going back to that, can we upgrade the quality for everyone and improve cost effectiveness through efficiency? Actually, food is the easiest to make both good and cheap. When we go to Japan, it's quite shocking. For many categories, the cost of many ingredients in Japan, if you buy them directly from the supermarket, like rice, vegetables, and fruits, can be 2 to 3 times the price in China.
Right.
But once it becomes packaged food, frozen food is actually, in fact, only half or a third of the price in China today. This means that Japan's level of food industrialization is significantly higher than China's. And in recent years in China, you see so many things emerging, from ice and snow ice cream to every category, Guoquan, every 10,000 store billion-dollar business, all backed by this chain leader. Not only did they develop a blockbuster product in the beginning, some are single products, but for milk tea, a few single products might be enough. But for Guoquan, Chendama, and snack boxes, it might require a complete replanning of a category. But no matter what, it all goes back upstream to construct a new set of infrastructure, significantly improving quality and efficiency, making things better and cheaper, and only then can it support the front-end chains we've seen in recent years. This is why things have improved and become cheaper than before.
I was just thinking, this is also a very interesting conclusion. In the basic categories of food, clothing, housing, and transportation, if you think about it seriously, you'll find that in terms of food, the value that can be created on the supply side and the process of industrialization is the greatest. If we think about it seriously, you see, in terms of clothing, we are already a major producer in the global supply chain. And when it comes to clothing, aside from brand value, emotional value, and the value of specific scenarios, there are indeed some, like when we previously discussed an episode about underwear, there are some innovations in specific scenarios. But overall, it is indeed not as significant as food. Then regarding housing, I actually think there is a lot of potential, but the problem is that it is too asset heavy and has a very strong cyclical nature. But I still think housing is an interesting topic. It should be said that people's experiences, including things like renovations, are not particularly good. And when it comes to transportation, it actually requires heavy infrastructure investment. In this market, China should be quite leading globally, probably in the most advanced state. So looking back, it is indeed found that in terms of food, the space created by the efficiency of the supply chain is indeed very large. This makes me reflect. As I remember a few years ago, we were still wondering what China's 7-Eleven family would look like. At that time, we felt there was a lot of potential for convenience stores in China, but it seemed difficult to open that many. Many people were striving to push forward and open more chain convenience stores. And today, after this year has passed, looking back, it's not that we couldn't open that many convenience stores, but rather that we hadn't organized the demand and the value creation of the supply chain well enough to present it to users. Once you do, it directly eliminates certain categories within the convenience store, and suddenly 10,000 stores can be opened. Back then, how difficult it was for us to open 10,000 convenience stores.
This is why I didn't come back. For example, people like us with an internet background would say, hey, we also want to run convenience stores. If everyone is just thinking about implementing some systems to slightly improve operational efficiency, but today you haven't changed the systemic ability to acquire stores, the manpower within, and most importantly, you haven't moved the goods. You'll find that it's not about making fundamental improvements in retail, but rather the essence of these offline formats is actually driven by innovation in goods. And at the root of goods, innovation is the capability of the supply chain. So it brings us back to the essence of retail.
I think, as mentioned earlier, the value of digitalization is that I believe digitalization serves as a very important infrastructure in this process. It supports a crucial element in achieving a chain of 10,000 stores. Without this system, I think Luckin should be considered the first to achieve a chain of 10,000 stores, right? Digitalization plays a very, very important role in this. However, the emergence of Luckin itself is not directly related to digitalization. It's not the cause, right? What is the cause? It's about reorganizing, let's call it PMF, reorganizing the products to meet new demands, seizing a new window of opportunity, and quickly amplifying the match between these demands and products. Many of the original ones, whether we call them convenience stores or supermarkets, are actually certain links in the distribution channel. They solve the issue of reach, which is what we refer to as the distribution channel, right? Moving goods from point A to point B in this process, if you can solve penetration, which in the previous era meant solving penetration and reach, you also had significant value. That's why, for example, Yonghui superstores rapidly completed this in just a few years, right? So it's not that you can't open 10,000 convenience stores, but the core is indeed to effectively address a new demand, a key issue. Once you solve that, everything else might naturally follow. So this is always the secret or the beauty of doing consumer brand retail. It continuously connects new changes and innovations on the supply side with new demand changes and then matches them together. This is always a dual cycle process. If you only focus on one side, you'll miss the other. I think this is particularly interesting.
Yes, that's why I think innovation in consumption is so enduring. But what we've been looking at the most over the past few years is what is the starting point, the origin, or what is the fundamental driving force? In this context, we believe it is the product. You mentioned the story of Luckin Coffee earlier, which we are all familiar with, and it's all about the digital system that Luckin built. Yes, but when we take a closer look at the product, Luckin actually focused earlier on lattes that suit the Chinese palate. Then, within the lattes, it really centered around a few super popular items, starting with the cloud latte. It's actually the combination of the pearls from our pearl milk tea and the latte, leading to what we all know as the deep sea latte. These key products are the real foundation, and our subsequent digital infrastructure is what drives this. So often in the market, and this is something I frequently notice in consumer behavior, we like to talk about the differentiated things under the spotlight, but we often don't give enough recognition to the driving force and fundamentals behind them. In all our discussions, we actually focus on some key elements. Just like when we talked about branding earlier, we always focus on certain marketing models, and in this context, digital traffic channels. Actually, it's the combination of the pearls from our pearl milk tea and the latte, which later became what we all know as the deep sea latte. These key products are the real ones truly playing the role in this aspect, which is the product. Foundation and our subsequent digital infrastructure is what drives this. In narratives, we often highlight differences but miss the basics. The product supply chain is crucial, yet overlooked. We actually do not possess expertise in this field, so consciously, we also avoid discussing this issue.
Do you think that, in your opinion, distribution channels like Pinduoduo are in fact the most highly efficient in utilizing or perhaps capturing the value created on the supply chain and supply side that we just talked about in the market, and effectively, even though it might not have directly participated in the supply chain investment, including the management of factories, it is still involved in distribution and connection? But in reality, hasn't it captured the largest share, similar to the examples you mentioned, like rice and furniture? It might have captured this direct-to-consumer value from the supply chain and other more general and widespread industries. However, this brings about a problem, which is that in this process, you can't just demand price competitiveness, but a significant proportion leans towards price competitiveness. And if you look at brands like October Rice Field today or similar brands, when they are still a brand, they will definitely have their own quality baseline and ensure investment in research and development, allowing them to gradually improve rather than deteriorate. Do you agree with this viewpoint? If we view Pinduoduo and Douyin as two sides of the same coin, I think it's a better perspective.
Pinduoduo itself targets specific categories and actually doesn't emphasize significantly on creating differentiated value, but rather it aims, in particular, to provide as much consumer surplus as possible by depriving the brand surplus.
Depriving the producer surplus, right?
Yes, depriving the producer surplus, directly connecting to the factories, and even throughout the entire value chain, it aims to squeeze the distribution and branding stages as much as possible.
Right.
This creates a highly efficient chain, aiming to give as much of the surplus to the consumers as possible. So at this point, the question you raised earlier is about what category. But in terms of what we call Maslow's needs, if in the end it's just slippers or these daily necessities, they might not be the categories where a brand can emerge from my perspective. In the end, as long as you tell me the performance, that is, you accurately indicate the performance, and then you discover the price through competition as much as possible, then I, as a user, will obtain the consumer surplus. We definitely have different products, and there are different needs according to Maslow's hierarchy. Yes, other categories, right, you think can differ by 100%. For example, with food, I definitely want it to be safe, and I certainly want it to become increasingly fashionable and self-fulfilling. For instance, with my baby, I need to provide a sense of security, and for example, with these, I essentially want differentiation, which is what I call the other side of the coin. Actually, the greatest value TikTok has provided in recent years is, have you noticed that for the same product, TikTok has a particularly clever way, even for something like dental floss or a very basic product, Pinduoduo will definitely simplify its functions to the most basic level, right? Isn't it? But TikTok goes in another direction. After discovering this basic function, it will definitely sell you additional features and find ways to sell you the significance of these things. You might eventually find something particularly interesting, which is extreme. For the same functional item, the price can vary several times depending on the scenario in which the user purchases it. And you might be buying such things simultaneously, right? The essence of TikTok's platform is to create more diversity, and you'll find that both platforms are thriving. And within this, we can see that from an industry perspective, under the mechanism of Pinduoduo, it becomes increasingly difficult to establish a brand, right? Isn't it? Right? And today, if we want to scale up business in the long term and still have a brand business, it is actually possible to start from TikTok today, or TikTok combined with those long-term platforms like JD.com and Tmall, which can ensure long-term user retention. Offline is also possible. You have your store, your shelves, which are stable. And if you use Yuzan, you can also monetize your private domain users. Therefore, in specific categories, certain capable players will eventually overcome this threshold. Yes, he might reach what we initially expected. So today, looking back, when we were investing or starting a business, did we expect too much? Going back to that saying, you can redo every category, but no one can guarantee that you can make every category successful. A scalable brand, a compliant profit pool, good revenue, good profit, and a good image. There's no guarantee for this.
Yes, right? Yes, it is. I think this is a fantastic sharing. It's ultimately a bit like choosing which side of the coin you're on. When you care more about the efficiency of circulation and retain more of the consumer's surplus value, of course, the person creating this value gains the most benefit, right? But if you stand more on the side of saying, I want to invest in meeting the differentiated needs of consumers, emotional value is a very typical differentiated need, the most differentiated need. Yes, including the functional needs of some niche scenarios, then are we more standing from the perspective of investing in producer surplus? From an investment perspective, when you look at which side of the coin you choose, I think this is a more comprehensive way to view it, considering both sides as one. When there are topics that seem to have some contradictions and conflicts in public opinion, we present a more comprehensive perspective in this episode.
This is the best time for entrepreneurship, but also the most challenging time.
Yes, indeed.
Because it's not like the boom a few years ago, where everyone could come up with an idea, get some money, and give it a try. On the contrary, this is an ecosystem of continuous overlapping and clearing. In the end, it's a game where only a very, very few people can continue to win.
As the program comes to a close, I believe those who have listened this far will allow me to insert an advertisement. I completely agree with the viewpoints we are discussing, and it is for this reason that I feel creating a brand or a product now requires a great deal. As you mentioned, the infrastructure is very developed and prosperous, but the skills required to effectively utilize these technological facilities have increased by several dimensions. It was probably last year when I saw, from a digitalization perspective and from our company's standpoint, the areas where artificial intelligence might change and create value. Can we make the skills required by the entire brand more automated, more managed, and more result-oriented in delivery, turning them into ready-to-use technological facilities? This would allow brands to truly focus on creating the greatest value, as you mentioned, which is in our products and users. I think this can bring us back to a more normal state rather than as it is today when facing a customer or a business perspective, you find that there are just too many things they really need to do. Too many. I think this is also a particularly good way to wrap up. As we come to the end of the program, thank you for such a wonderful sharing today. At the end of our program, we have a regular segment called Moment. Originally, it was for brands to share a very impressive user or a very interesting consumer behavior. Now, from your perspective, is there an opportunity to share a consumer behavior that you find very interesting, or perhaps a particularly niche small consumer goods company that represents a certain trend for the future? Okay, I actually want to talk about a very common product, but in the past few years, I've often told people that it has a huge impact on passersby.
This company is one we invested in called Jihu, and they created a new type of tissue paper. When people think about tissue paper today, they might assume this product hasn't changed much in decades. But since this is a podcast, if you have the chance to open Douyin and search for Jihu tissue paper, you might find that the ones we used to use were somewhat cumbersome, with blue, yellow, and green colors. Right. But today, they've turned it into a bow, made it in Hermes colors, and most importantly, they've turned it into a hook. Perhaps such a simple product innovation, with hooks that can have different patterns layered on top, is the area where I've learned the most in the past few years. We often say that many products seem to have no more opportunities for innovation. I often tell everyone, can you imagine this is rice, this is a piece of furniture, or even just a box of tissues? It's not only on the consumer side, but it might also be on the supply chain side, reconstructing its production and distribution processes globally. So what is the greatest motivation for me? Even for a product that seems incapable of change. When a product like this is launched, it can generate $1 billion in revenue annually. This could potentially propel the company into the top 5 in the paper industry in China, advancing towards the top 3, all within just a year. The greatest insight for me is that, in fact, there are many deeper levels of innovation that exist within each category. Every product has such opportunities, transitioning from an era of stock to an era of growth, from a seller's market to a buyer's market. However, as we just discussed, to become a true changer in this industry, one needs to understand and be able to do much more than before. This is why I'm filled with anticipation for what we are doing in this industry.
It seems like we're back to saying that for any generic product, as long as you observe life carefully, you can discover the hidden value and the value after use. All right, that's all for today. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, thank you, everyone.